All right, so great. Um, Good evening, my dear citizens of planet Earth, and greetings to all inhabitants of other planets who may be watching us tonight. This is a Honey Badger Club. I am your host, Andrei Repula, and I am a science communicator and space enthusiast. And tonight we have a distinct pleasure to be speaking with Dr. Robert Zubrin, who holds PhD in nuclear engineering. He is also an aerospace visionary and one of the world-leading experts and advocates for human settlements on Mars. He is founder of the Mars Society, the largest international association dedicated to turning Mars into our new home. Dr. Zubrin is also the author of groundbreaking book, Case for Mars, which inspired many people, including myself, to take humanity next giant leap seriously. Tonight, you will hear directly from the man who has spent decades showing us how Mars can truly become humanity's new home. Dr. Zubrin, good evening. Thank you very much for joining Honey Badger Club tonight.
Good evening. Dobry wieczór.
Dobry wieczór. All right. Before we go deep into our conversation, I would like to express my personal belief to you. That I truly believe that humanity expansion into space in general and Mars colonization in particular is the next logical, perhaps even the mandatory step of the evolution of our species as Homo sapiens. But before we dive deep into the mechanics and logistics of this process of Mars colonization, I would like us to answer and understand one important fundamental question. So, about 60 years ago, we, Homo sapiens, started a process which could be considered as colonization of other planets. So we started landing on the moon, right? But then we stopped. So the question to you, Dr. Zubrin, why do you think humans, like living people, not machines like curiosity or perseverance, why humans stopped landing on other planets in 1972 following the Apollo 17 mission?
Well, because we had a massive failure of political leadership in the United States during the Nixon administration. Um, it, there's nothing inevitable about political leaders making the necessary decisions. There can be failure. And of course, we're seeing that right now in terms of the current situation and the inadequacy of the response of political leaders to it. But in the case of Apollo, it was kind of like if, when Columbus had come back from the New World the first time, Ferdinand and Isabella had said, "So what? We don't care. Forget it. Um, get lost, Columbus." Um, and that's basically what happened. We had opportunity at that to rapidly to establish on Mars. NASA's plans as of 1969 had been followed. We would have had our first landing on Mars by 1981 and probably would have had a Mars base by the end of the 1980s and Mars settlements by around 20 years. And the first children born on Mars would probably be graduating from high school here. But that was the course not followed. They had a failure of political, um, and that failure has continued to the present day. And if any, the political leadership that we have right now, both in the United States and in fact, there isn't even really a NASA administrator right now, is much worse than it's ever been before. On the other hand, there is now a new source of initiative towards human expansion into space, and that's coming from the private sector. So uh, in the 1960s, no one would be looking for an entrepreneur to save the space program. NASA was doing great. We didn't need an Elon Musk or someone like that to come along. Now, because you know, in the 70s and the 80s, most people, including me, uh, viewed the failure of uh, the government as being a temporary situation, and we'll get it right. We'll get back to what we were. Just we'll just it'll happen. And this, frankly, was my point of view through the 90s when I wrote The Case for Mars. If you read it, the main option I'm presenting there is here's the plan. Now all we need is another John F. Kennedy to step up and do it. Although I did present some alternatives, but clearly the main option still was the JFK version. Today, that really seems far fetched, and what was far fetched in the 90s, that is a private mission to Mars, is now the primary option.
All right. Well, yeah, Christopher Columbus in fact died not knowing that he discovered America. It was people after him who realized that he discovered a new continent. So let's hope that something like that won't happen to space exploration when we go out there. Okay, yeah, I agree with your answer. On my opinion, there is no political will to go out there and explore. But let's try to change it, and this podcast is one of our opportunities to change mindset of some people. All right. So let's go to your book, Case of Mars. I read it, I read this book in 2016 when I watched a National Geographical documentary called Mars. You participated in that excellent movie, truly inspirational. I was amazed by it. So that's when I got the book and I read it. So yeah, I know you are being asked a lot about Mars Direct, was the logistic to go to space. So I would like to ask a similar question, but maybe from a different angle. So you first proposed this plan in 1990. Um, how did that plan evolve over the last 35 years? So do you think like some technologies could even make this plan more efficient, like AI becomes a hype right now? Do you see some technologies like AI being implemented into your plan, becoming more efficient and doing Mars colonization possible right here, right now?
Okay, well, all right, those are interesting questions. Eh, well, first of all, the two things that have happened since 1990. First of all, NASA has conducted a effective robotic exploration program since 1990. Let's see. Well, there was Mars Observer, which failed in 1993, but then we had Pathfinder and Mars Global Surveyor succeeded. Then we had two failed probes in 1999, but then we had Odyssey in 2001, Spirit and Opportunity in 2004, Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2005, Phoenix in 2007, Curiosity in 2009, Maven in 2012 or something, Insight, Perseverance. So there's been a pretty good campaign of robotic exploration, and um, that has discovered a lot of resources on Mars that previously we only guessed at. For instance, we now know there are glaciers of pure water ice on Mars that go as far south as 38 degrees north, which is the latitude of San Francisco or Athens on Earth. So that means that we definitely can get water in mid latitudes. Uh, they've discovered the various minerals and so forth, and so that's been pretty good. So the one place where NASA actually has delivered is the robotic exploration program. The Now, in terms of human exploration, they haven't done a thing. Okay, but we've had private initiatives. Of course, the most prominent has been SpaceX, which has developed very successfully partially reusable medium lift launch vehicles. The Falcons are very successful. They're launching now almost 3 a week, which is incredible, 150 a year. Um, so that's terrific, and it gives us a lot of reason to hope that their Starship, which is a fully reusable heavy lift vehicle, will also succeed. It may take a little longer to succeed than Elon Musk promises, but I think the team can do it and will do it, and that's definitely going to uh, make human planetary exploration much more cost effective. Now, I actually think, however, that while Starship is excellent as a fully reusable heavy lift launch vehicle, and it can be used reasonably well as an interplanetary Earth to Mars vehicle, it is not very good as a Mars return vehicle because it is so big and heavy. And I think they need to develop an additional vehicle, which I call Starboat, which is kind of like Starship, but much smaller. And you would use that to return from Mars. Uh, you could land starships on Mars one way, and now you have an apartment building on Mars and heavy payload delivery to Mars. But if you have got a starship delivered to Mars, you really don't want to be sending it back to Earth. Also, the Starboat would be a great exploring vehicle. It could go from Mars orbit to the surface and back up to the orbit, and you could have a starship in Mars orbit with methane oxygen to use as a refueling tanker. You could also do the same thing on the moon. So Starship plus Starboat is a very effective combination to do both Moon and Mars. Uh, so that's pretty good. And also, what's good is not just the technology that SpaceX has developed, which is good stuff, but the example. So that, uh, okay, a lot of people are concerned about Elon Musk himself because he's um, erratic. Um, but if Starship is successful, it will be copied, and there will be other versions of the same technology offered both by other free world companies, other American companies, and you know elsewhere in the free world, and also from China for sure. Uh, and so it's not going to be a monopoly. It's going to be a new technology that's going to get into general use. And and here's the thing: if there are reusable launch vehicles, not long afterwards, there's going to be something else new in the world, which is used launch vehicles. Okay, there's actually going to be a market in used launch vehicles. And think about this. You know, new cars are pretty expensive. A lot of people, I'd say actually most people on Earth who own cars, could not afford to buy a new car. But they all have cars because you can pick up a used car for 1/10 the cost of a new car. Okay? And this is why a lot of people, the large majority of people on this planet who own cars, bought them used, and had to, but they could, and they did, and so they got cars. And Musk once told me that he thought he could build starships for $10 million each, which means that either he or his uh, the copycats that follow him would probably be willing to sell them for 20 million each, new, which means that sooner or later they show up on the used market for 2 million each. Now, if you actually have something like that and it can transport 100 people to Mars, 2 million divided by 100 people is $20,000 each, which is more than I've ever paid for an airline ticket. But it compared to the incomes of people today, it's cheaper, a lot cheaper, in fact, than a ticket on a ship going from Europe to the New World in the 1700s. Um, that would typically take a lot more of the income of an ordinary person to pay for such a thing. Um, and you know, many Americans, including me, all Americans have an immigrant story in their background. And if it's recent enough, you know the story, and you hear about everyone in the village putting together the money to send one person over to America where he can make enough money to bring more people over. And that's how they did it. But it cost a lot to go in those days. And compared to which $20,000 in today's money and today's incomes is actually small. So what that means is that once that happens, colonization of Mars becomes possible. And it'll be possible for a lot of different groups of people who will probably have very different ideas of what they want to create on Mars, different ideals of the ideal political system. Some will be religious, some will be secular, some, they'll have all sorts of ideas. Some, will be for libertarian free enterprise, some will be for social democracy, others will be for some new political concepts that we haven't even thought about yet. And they'll go. Now, I think certainly artificial intelligence can be of assistance now. People use it, engineers use it today. I mean, you can ask ChatGPT where's the best place to buy a certain part, and instead of having to search all over the internet for it, it'll just tell you this is the. But so there's a lot of things you can do with it, but I think we're just seeing the beginning of artificial intelligence. And one thing that I think is really going to be very useful of artificial intelligence is that I think at a certain point there's going to be an app, okay, in which can explain to you how to do anything you need to do. So, in other words, think of an app that allows you to do anything, okay, whether it's designing a starship or fixing the washing machine, or doing a medical operation. And the ability to unpack all of human practical knowledge on Mars, where, in other words, one of the things that's going to be for sure about early Mars is a labor shortage. It's not going to be anything like the number of people around that there are on Earth. And uh, so that's a labor shortage, both in quantity, but also diversity of skills. So if you have a way to enable anyone to do anything, that really helps solve a lot of problems on a new world.
Sure. I totally agree. I use AI a lot in my own work, and I use it basically for some mechanical routine decisions, like when I need to write a piece of Python code, some really routine one, and I understand, okay, it's so easy, but I still need to spend like 10 minutes to write it. So I just let AI write it, and he does it in 10 seconds, and then it just accelerate the workflow, and it just speeds up the engineering. So yeah, as you have mentioned that Mars colonization, this is an engineering project, and when we have some engineering routine tasks to do, I'm pretty sure, very confident that AI will accelerate the progress. All right, thank you very much for your answer. When I read your book, one of my favorite quotes is very direct, saying, "When on Mars, act like Martians, or do as Martians do." It's very engineering approach. Like you don't have to invent some sci-fi utopia. You have to work right here, right now, with the reality which you control. So, and this was your Mars Direct is about. You don't have to invent sci-fi utopia. You use technology. You go to Mars and you use Mars resources, and then you kind of you place in loop this different Mars Direct like flight back and forth, and so you scale up the colony. So, is the ultimate plan of Mars Direct plan, is it the terraforming of Mars? I know that you describe it a little bit more in your second book. Sorry, I forgot it is here. The New World on Mars. So, my question is, um, as I understand that the goal of Mars Direct, the ultimate goal, is terraforming Mars. So, what kind of economy, political system, or even religious will emerge or will be copied from Earth on a Mars, which will be hopefully terraformed?
Okay, well, as I discussed in the case for Mars, and then also, yes, in the New World on Mars, um, Mars will go through a number of phases. First is exploration, then base building, which will allow much more sustained exploration as well as developing key technologies needed for settlement, then settlement, and then terraforming. I believe that Mars will be terraformed, but it will take a lot of people on Mars to do it. I mean, because it's going to be a big project. Even with much more advanced technologies, terraforming a planet's a big job. Um, and it will be done by the Martians. They're the ones for whom it will be worth doing. It's not going to be done by people on Earth who have abstract ideas on the kind of Mars they'd like to see. It's going to be done by the people who live there. That's why schemes, um, well, I even did some of this in the case for Mars. I talked about crashing asteroids into Mars as one possible plan. But I don't believe that anymore because people on Mars are not going to want to be crashing asteroids into Mars. That's much too dangerous. They'll go for schemes like, and I also, which were in fact the primary option I discussed in the case for Mars and in the New World on Mars, of producing greenhouse gases to warm the planet. And when you warm the planet, you outgas CO2, which warms the planet even more and it thickens the atmosphere. And then water, ice starts to melt, and you get rivers flowing and lakes filling up and rain. And now you can spread plants around, and away you go. That's the basic plan. And I think once Martians are capable of doing it, they'll do it. And now, so there's a couple of things that you asked about there, and one I kind of alluded to in my previous answer. I don't believe there's going to be just one big city on Mars. I think there's going to be dozens of small cities founded by different kinds of people with different ideas. And some of these ideas are going to be good ideas and some are going to be bad ideas. But the thing is, you see, um, history is the court. Um, this is going to be settled by natural selection. The Mars the forms of society that prevail on Mars will be those that people like the most, that are the most attractive to immigrants. So I think that, in science fiction, a very common plot is a space colony, which is a tyranny. And then this is great for literature because now you can have the brave revolutionaries overthrowing the tyrant, and you've got a great story there to work with. But but I don't think an extraterrestrial tyranny is possible or not possible for long, because no one would want to emigrate to one. Okay, so an extraterrestrial tyranny would die on the vine. It's free societies that will attract the immigrants. Also, only free societies will be sufficiently innovative to make all the inventions they need to prosper on Mars, both to deal with the technological challenges of Mars and also, which are, I think, going to be one of Mars's great exports, which will be inventions. Inventions made on Mars to meet the challenges on Mars. Um, whether these are inventions in ultra efficient food production and fusion power and robotics and artificial intelligence to deal with the labor shortage, lots of things, problems Martians are going to have to solve, and all these things are going to be very useful on Earth. But you need to have a free society to do that. Now, there's some other questions there that are open questions, um, because the need for freedom is in some tension with the need for social solidarity. Um, and so, how do you achieve both of those necessary conditions? And, um, on Earth, there's a variety of ways that people have tried with various degrees of success. But the but people are going to try, and people are going to come up with different ideas on political structures. Um, Democracy has its points, but it also has its downsides. The And if you want to know the truth, the idea of human rights, which I very much support, is actually an anti democratic idea. Because what human rights say is that you can do certain things regardless of the majority opinion. Okay, freedom of the press means that even if the majority think you should not be able to publish this, you can. Um, and so, so people have tried to work this out, and people are going to continue to try to work this out. And uh, so I can't predict for you what the forms will be, but here's the thing: it the this the Martian colonies that have the the best forms for allowing people to realize their full human potential will attract the most immigrants. And if they come up with forms that are better than those in the old world, they'll attract an awful lot of immigrants. Okay? The people will vote with their feet to go to those places. And so that's how it is. And of course, this affects political forms, it affects social forms, it affects even architecture. Um, but look, right now here in America, um, and I think many places in the advanced sector of the world, um, people are atomized. We don't have a good sense of community anymore, and a lot of people are feeling um, a kind of distress from that. They have a lot more friends on Facebook than in real life. And so forth. And it's really no substitute. And the and I think certainly a successful Martian colony will have a very strong sense of community, and that might be one of its great selling points. Um, on the other hand, it will have to have that and still not have that overcrowd freedom. Um, the So it's tough. Now you ask about religions. Uh, Common religion is one way people have achieved social solidarity historically, but it also definitely has had its downsides. And so you have to figure out how to work that problem. Um, and Anyway, but the basic answer is we're going to try everything, and the right answer will win.
Absolutely, I agree. So the Darwin's law or principle of natural selection is universal, and it will be applied to social constructs when we colonize Mars. I agree with that.
Right.
And about
But
social
it actually
media,
works better in this sense than in the biological world, because you see, in the biological world, positive adaptions cannot spread except to your children, whereas in social evolution, if one society figures out how to be better, that example can spread not just to its descendants but to other cities.
agree, totally agree. Well, speaking about biological evolution, you mentioned social media. Well, I'll say that people who talk more to each other in social media, they won't reproduce, right? And people who maintain each contact with each other, they will be producing kids. So that's why when we colonize Mars, we will have to abandon somehow social media, perhaps. Well, I don't know. My point is, if the plan works, if Mars, no, not if, when Mars terraforming succeeds, what your realistical estimate from where we are when the first representative of Homo sapiens of our species will be born on Mars?
Oh, well, I think there'll be people born on Mars long before Mars is terraformed. Um, I think probably there'll be children born on Mars within 30 years from now. Um, because once we establish a base there, okay, it will definitely pay whoever is running the space, whether it's NASA or Elon Musk or the United Nations, or I don't care. Whoever's running this thing, uh, it will pay them to have the people they send to Mars stay for longer periods of time. So you say the basic tour on Mars is a year and a half, but if you can stay an extra 2 years, we'll give you $1 million. And for most people, getting $1 million for 2 years' work is a pretty good deal, right? So they say, sure. And let's make it 6 years. So you get people staying over for longer periods of time. They're naturally going to form relationships with each other. And in the course of things, children are going to be born. And so there'll be children born on Mars in Mars bases long before we're terraforming Mars. Even before there are serious cities on Mars, there'll be a certain number of children running around the base.
Great. So you estimate within 30 years. Well, this is impressive, and I truly waiting for that moment to hear the announcement that the first human child was born on Mars. This was the ending of this National Geographic show, which was truly exceptionally inspirational. All right, um, you know, let's try to take a step back and discuss. So we are jumping between NASA, Elon Musk, U.S., China. So. Uh, what or we're discussing like NASA, like government funded companies versus private sector. What kind of involvement of human civilization must be in order to provide the self-sustained what the kind of involvement of human civilization should be in order to make Mars colonies stable. They won't like die out. People go stay 1 year and then come back, and then they will never come back like it was with Moon. So is SpaceX enough alone to provide the stability of Mars colony, or is the U.S. project is I don't know, European plus U.S. project, or it should be like entire planet project?
Well, I don't think at this point that we can make any project a project of the entire planet. Um, the I don't think that SpaceX can do this alone. I think that the initial human Mars missions are going to have to be a public private partnership. Um, there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, so that I think that while the private sector, and you should know at this point, there are other companies starting to develop their own Mars plans besides SpaceX. Um, and But I think that given the problems with the government and with NASA, this may well be led by SpaceX or other space companies. Um, there definitely is going to have to be some government participation and support. I'll give you one example. Um, you're going to need a lot of power on Mars. And for example, in both the Mars Direct plan and the SpaceX plan, which is a derivative of Mars Direct, you make the return propellant methane oxygen on Mars out of Martian CO2 and water. Well, it takes power. And the only really good power source for this is nuclear power. Well, space nuclear reactors use highly enriched uranium or plutonium. And these are controlled materials. So you're going to have uh, you don't necessarily have to have government leadership on this, but you have to have government agreeing to this. Um, Also, if the government is hostile to this, it could certainly stop it. So we have to have at least passive government support for this, and preferably some measure of active government support. Because, for example, NASA has this thing called the Deep Space Network, which are radio antennas that they can use to receive information from deep space, from Mars, from Saturn, from Neptune. And this is an enormous asset, and it would be enormously expensive to duplicate it. You definitely want to have the government using its assets to support you.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with your point that at this point we cannot colonize Mars mutually as the entire humanity, because there are way too many disagreements between different parties, and I am as Ukrainian don't have to mention them as the people who are watching us online right now. Well, all right, let's go back a little bit to the positive news. Have you heard about recent NASA announcement of possible life in G0 crater discovered by Perseverance? Do you
Yes, I
do
have.
you think do you this is great news, truly great. Do you think that this kind of events will kind of fuel the motivation of the government of different organization to pursue Mars colonization even harder, just to go there and see maybe it's a different biochemistry, maybe it's like no not carbon based life, so let's just go and see. It's so do you think this kind of events will trigger the
Well,
boost the
I think,
motivation?
well, certainly should. The fact that um, anything that makes Mars interesting, more interesting, should accelerate exploration. I mean, there will be people who are opponents of Mars exploration who use this to argue that we shouldn't go because we might contaminate it or something. But um, but I think to most people is the more interesting Mars becomes, the more we want to go there and find out about it. And look, the planet that we know the most about, of course, is the Earth, and that's because we're here. Um, so yes, we do have the capacity of contaminating samples that we find on Earth, but nevertheless, we find out an awful lot more about Earth than we do on planets which we can't go to. And so uh, it should definitely increase interest. And I do think, by the way, that these results that Perseverance found are quite strong. You really have to stretch things to come up with an explanation that is not life. Because on Earth, if you found that, it would be a biomarker unless you were looking at volcanically heated material, and which this stuff is not.
Right, absolutely, yeah. The NASA statements say that we cannot tell that this is not life. So everything points out that this is life, but we just have to work a little bit more to make sure. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I was very glad that this news was circulated, but yeah, so much things going on in the world, so that this news got kind of lost in the stream of politics and other stuff. But anyway, all right, we are approaching towards the end of our conversation. It's 45 minutes, so I'm going to ask you the last question. Maybe it's a little bit provocative, but it's my vision. So Dr. Zubrin, if humanity fails to colonize Mars or other planets of solar system, how long do you think our species might survive on Earth before we eventually would go extinct as Homo sapiens?
Well, I don't know. It could be a long time before we go extinct, but I think the more immediate threat is we go into a dark age. Um, because you see, all right, uh, and this is something I think that Ukrainians should understand. Okay, why is there war? There is war because there are people who want war. Okay, and these people who are tyrants are the ones who want war, um, because war is necessary to justify tyranny. Okay, that is, if we take Russia as an example, this concept of the silnaya ruka, okay, the need for the strong arm, okay, that, in other words, Russians will tell you, for example, that Stalin was necessary because without someone like him, Russia could not be strong. Now, this thesis, in fact, is completely wrong. Stalin, in order to preserve his power, killed most of the Red Army officer corps, and that led to the disaster of 1941. But nevertheless, the mythology is there that to be strong in war requires a tyrant, an absolute leader. We can't have dissent. Everyone has to do what they're told, or we'll be weak. All right. So tyrants like war, because war is necessary to justify tyranny. Now, why, though, is war necessary? Okay, if you want to argue that war is fundamentally necessary, you have to say that ultimately humanity is against each other. That is, that there are finite resources, that not everyone can have what they need, and therefore we have to take it before they get it, or we have to kill them before they take it from us, and so forth. And this thesis of limited resources in one form or another was the root of all the important catastrophes of the 20th century, including the two world wars, the Holocaust, the Holodomor, and ultimately it's the root of this war, uh, because once again the thesis, tyrants have to argue that war is necessary, and the argument that war is necessary depends upon this idea of a zero sum world. Okay, and well, for example, Hitler once said, this idea of perpetual prosperity through scientific progress is a Jewish plot to undermine the people's belief in the necessity for war. Okay, now it's not a Jewish plot, but it does undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. Okay, and we need to undermine people's belief in the necessity for war, which means we need to underline the thesis of limited resources. Now, the most effective way to do that is to show that humanity is not confined to the earth. You know, a number of years ago, um, and I was around then, you weren't, but I'll tell you about it. In the early 1970s, um, there was a very prestigious group which called itself the Club of Rome, uh, and they published a study in which they argued that all the resources of the world would run out by the year 2000. And the reason why is they looked at all the oil reserves and they said, this is how much oil reserves there are. And we're using this many barrels of oil each year. And if you divide the numbers, you come out that we run out of oil by the year 2000. And we run out of copper by the year 2001. And we run out of zinc by 1998. And they went through all the different stuff that we use. And they showed that it would all run out by about the end of the 20th century. Now, this was all completely stupid, okay, but a lot of people believe them. In fact, all established opinion, like if the major newspapers, New York Times and so forth, said, "Oh, wow, this we have to come to grips with this reality. We're running out of everything, and we need to stop economic growth and population growth so we can at least stretch things out." And the and in China, this was taken so seriously, they implemented a population control program, of only one child per family, which was catastrophic. Uh, there were people who tried to introduce bills into the U.S. Congress that would, you'd have to have a permit to have a child. Now, fortunately, they didn't get very far. People didn't want to hear this, but they were basing this idea on these fantastical ideas that were going to run out. Now, of course, we didn't run out of anything by the year 2000. And in fact, there's much more oil reserves known today than there was in 1972. Um, and this is despite of all the oil we've used in the meantime. In fact, it's because of all the oil we've used in the meantime. Um, and in general, it's not true that resources are finite, because resources are defined by technology, and people invent technology. And in fact, the more people, the more inventors, and inventions are cumulative. And that's why the standard of the world has gone up as the population has gone up, not down as the Malthusians would predict. But the but nevertheless, this seems like it has to be true. How much oil is there? Sooner or later, we're going to use it. And gee, if China industrializes fully and everybody there starts driving cars like us, the oil in the world is all going to get used up too fast. And China, the people there have to look at America and say, look at all the stuff the Americans are using. If they keep going on like this, there'll be nothing there for us. And the so this is the thing that's driving. Now, this is all stupid, as I said, because it's simply untrue. Um, the As populations has gone up, standard of living has gone up, not down. Okay, because of accelerated invention. Okay, but the year 2000 came and went, and the Club of Rome's predictions were all shown to be false. But around 2006, they held a reunion. They all got together again. And they said, well, everybody says we were wrong because our predictions did not come true. But we were fundamentally right. Maybe we misestimated the amount of oil reserves. Okay, we made a few mistakes, but fundamentally, we're right. We have to be right because it's quite clear that the Earth is only this much. Okay, now, you see, and nevertheless, this always appears to be true to people because you try to refute this. It's like trying to convince someone who doesn't understand mathematics that a 1 centimeter long line segment has an infinite number of points in it. How can a little line segment like this have an infinite number of points in it? That doesn't make any sense. No, I don't believe that. Okay, but even the simplest person can believe that a line that goes off forever in both directions has an infinite number of points in it. And so, see, if we go into space, we show this is true. It's not that we're going to get oil from Mars. We're not going to get oil from Mars. Okay, we'll probably get a lot of useful inventions from Mars. That's true. But what the most important thing we're going to get from Mars is an understanding, okay, that there's an infinite universe, okay, that we are not bounded, that there's no reason killing each other, fighting over provinces, when by working together we can create planets. And that's the case for Mars.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the fundamental need of human being is expansion. So let's make this expansion peaceful by colonizing in vertical direction towards the stars, not in horizontal
Mm.
direction on the surface of planet Earth when
Right.
we have to go and invade other countries. So, Dr. Zubrin, thank you very much for this conversation. I very much enjoyed it. So is our people in the chat. It's 6 a.m. in Ukraine, but people joined to listen to you. Again, thank you very much. I believe we made a contribution. We changed a few minds and to encourage people to study physics, math, engineering, just to go out there and see what's going on Mars. All right. You have a good evening, and
Oh,
I will wait for your new
дякую.
books.
Окей, до
Дякую.
побачення.
До побачення. До побачення.